Hearing it. Hi, welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. My wife needs to turn down her phone. There it is. I was hearing the theme music, and I was like, wait a minute, but I'm seeing myself on the screen. So, what, you gonna say something? You're unmuting
Yes,
yourself.
I kind of did that on purpose so you'd be able to hear that I was playing the music.
Well, I figured as much. I saw the intro music on the screen. Want to show them something else?
Yeah, but you're not always... Oh, no, not really.
Well, okay. First of all, let me welcome everybody to the program. If this is your first time joining us, the byline down there says it all, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
That's what I've usually started out the show, and I kind of missed that a little bit. We didn't introduce ourselves. I got distracted.
No, you did.
Um,
Are you not going to introduce who I am?
and the other voice you're hearing is our lovely producer, my wife, Mary Kay, who has a new toy.
She's no longer a disembodied voice.
And that's it. That might be the only clips you're getting. I installed the producer cam for her. That has been a recurring joke on this show for months and months and months about wanting to get a producer cam. She talks so much she could actually show herself on camera. Unfortunately,
When I do, you guys can be seen too.
yeah, well,
And they can see what the set
and they can see what the set looks like and all of that. But she has all the power on whether or not to switch that on or off. We can't reach it, so it may never come on again. I don't know, but it's there. There is a producer cam, so she has the freedom to actually show herself. Anyway, so what the show is all about, it's right there in the bylines, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. What we try to do on this show is we take up 4, sometimes 5 topics every week of things that people are out there talking about around the water cooler. And of course, you can go anywhere on the internet to find your commentary on the news. And what we try to do to make this program stand out from all of that other hubbub that's out there is we do try to bring a uniquely Christian perspective to the discussion. So when Ben and I talk about these issues, when Mary Kay chimes in, one thing we all try to do is we try to put Jesus Christ first. So how should we be talking about these things if Jesus Christ really is our Lord and Savior? You can be the judge of how well we succeed at that, but that's at least what we try to do. The other thing that we try to do is make this a group conversation. It's not just between those of us here in this room, but you are invited to be part of the discussion as well. And the way you do that is you comment. Right now, we are streaming live every Wednesday at 5:30. We do this show live. We are streaming live on both the Trinity Joppa Facebook page and the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. Whichever one of those platforms you're watching us on, if you happen to be joining us live, you can just comment. You can comment in the live chat on YouTube, comment in the comment section on Facebook. When you do, the first thing you will notice is that your comment will appear over there to the left, that box over there to Ben's left. And also, it will appear here on my screen, hopefully, if the internet's working like it's supposed to. And I will see your comment, and once there is a break in the conversation, a natural point, then we will read it, and we will answer any questions, respond to any comments, and you can be part of the discussion, part of the dialogue. So we'd love it if you're watching the program with us here live, if you join in and let us know your thoughts. The best shows are always the ones where we have a lot of back and forth. If you're not watching us live, however, and you're watching this on Memorex, so to speak, you're watching us on replay,
What?
please, yeah, I know, shut up, young people, young person over here. You got it. Anyway, if you're not watching us live, you're watching this after the fact, you are still invited to be part of the conversation, because we do want you to feel included. So one thing we do is when we start out each show is we do try to go back to any comments that were left on the YouTube video from last week. Facebook kind of gets buried sometimes in the time, or whatever they call it, the page. What's the big thing? It's not a timeline. Newsfeed. Thank you. And so that's sometimes a little bit hard to build up. So we ask people, not there, but if you're going to comment after the fact, do it on the YouTube channel. Plus, frankly, commenting on the YouTube channel makes YouTube more likely to share the video with other people. So it's a little self-serving, but all in good Christian love. So comment there on the YouTube channel, and we will take up your comment at the start of the following week's episode. And before we do that, did I forget anything? I got distracted a lot this week.
Yeah, you found your way through it.
We around to get there. All right, so we do have a couple of comments from last week's show, and I'm going to ask your help on this one, Ben.
Sure.
They were both from Brian Brownell, one of our frequent commenters and viewers. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for watching, Brian.
The first thing he said is putting God first versus putting ourselves first should be a constant topic of discussion among Christians today, because I think it is where we are weakest. And I know, remember, I was talking about that. I'm trying to remember which story we were talking about last week where that came up. Do you remember?
Was it in the op-ed?
Which op-ed?
The New York Times one about just
the one that the Christian Post was blasting the New York Times.
Yeah.
Op-ed. Yeah. Maybe that might have been we were talking about it.
There was the New York Times op-ed. There was the space launch, the Jeff Bezos. There was,
which we will never speak of again.
Man, the weeks all just blend together. It's great.
I mean,
the Bethlehem pastor, the John Piper's successor resigned.
Right.
Oh yeah.
The pastor planes.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
and
right.
The pastor planes.
Maybe it was in response to that about
Yeah.
putting others the gospel first versus ourselves.
Ourselves.
Speaking of being self-serving,
Yeah.
having those self-serving
Flying coach instead
flying
of
coach and yeah, right.
I mean, do you agree with him when with Brian here, where he says that he thinks that that's one of our weakest points in the Christian church today, as far as putting ourselves first versus God?
Yeah, I think I would agree to an extent. And this is nothing honestly new. I mean, Jesus railed against the Pharisees for having the appearance of holiness on the outside, but inwardly being whitewashed tombs. There's the parable about if you walk into the synagogue and you say to this person who doesn't look a certain way, you sit over there, but you say to the man with the fine rings and everything, you have the best seat over here. Have you not become judges with evil thoughts? That's what Jesus says. And so it's really not much new if we're kind of putting those appearances first, and really it's thinly veiled love of money when you're saying like, hey, the person with the nice clothes gets to sit over here. Yeah, I think Jesus has a lot to say about that. And so I think as Christians, we should be concerned with it as well.
Well, and I'll tell you one way that I tend to think, and maybe I'm just completely out to lunch here, but another way, a very common way I think that this surfaces that maybe we Christians aren't as cognizant of, we don't pay as much attention to, is all the trappings of church. Where if, let's say that you're going to a church and they make some, I don't know, they repaint the wall in the cry room or something like that.
Color of the carpet.
The color of the carpet, or any number of things you could put out there. But there's some.
Okay, but there's a smart reason why it should be wine colored, and that's in case somebody drops.
Okay, insert your item here. All right.
No, but you're right.
But something changes about what you're used to.
Mm-hmm.
All right, not the message, not the gospel, not the service, nothing about.
They removed my pew.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. They wanted to install my own self-service. They wanted to install some good camera stands for some in-person camera operators, and they had to take out a few pews to do it, and they took out my favorite pew. Okay, whatever it may be. All right.
Well, no lie. We started live streaming when COVID happened, and nobody could be in, or very few people could be in the actual sanctuary.
You have a producer cam, you could put it on. I'm just saying.
I'm not going to. And we put all the camera equipment and all the stuff down in the center aisle because we didn't need it. And everybody was like raving about the camera angles and everything like that. And then they're like, we want to come back into church. And I'm like, well, you're not going to get these camera angles in.
We didn't really have those trappings during COVID.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of those trappings. We just had to, we had to do what we had to do.
But I think a lot of people get, it's like, why, if your church changes something like that and you get all an uproar, worst case scenario, you actually end up leaving the church as a result of over those differences and those trappings. Why were you at the church in the first place? Was it really for God, or was it for you? Was it because of your personal preference? Just like, you want to go to a Billy Joel concert and not somebody else's concert because you like Billy Joel better. Okay, well, that's about you. Is that why you're going to this particular church or that particular church? Because this one feels more like a Billy Joel concert versus a Barry Manilow concert? I mean,
I want to go see Bono because he's got rock star glasses. That's
yeah, I mean, seriously. And so that's kind of like, if that, at that point, you're not doing it for God, you're doing it for you. And so that's where I kind of see when Brian here says he thinks this is a big problem in the modern church, I tend to agree with him because that's always been kind of a a bugaboo point for me. And so I do see that. I think a lot of times in the churches we are putting our own personal preferences ahead of Jesus in that regard, and that's and we tend to lose focus on keeping the main thing. Is this about Jesus, or is this about, the color of the carpet, or, the layout of this thing or that thing, or whatever it may be?
There's a saying that I go back to frequently. Heard it in college, but it's always stuck with me. And it's, I wish I could remember who it's from, but it says tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. So meaning that distinction there, we are standing on the shoulders of people who have gone before us. That's a tradition. That's the gospel that's been passed down to us. Those are those things that bind us together in Christian brotherhood. But traditionalism are those things that are kind of those sacred cows that we tend to put up on a pedestal. And that signifies that, when you're putting those things up, then we need to check the state of our own.
Well, and I'll tell you where it becomes
Health
even more of a
faith.
problem is when we're trying to bring in people from the community or invite more people into the church. It almost has an impact of, let's say there's some changes that something that is just not appealing to the local community today. Maybe it appealed to them 20 years ago. I mean, you see this in a lot of older churches that get stuck in, this is the way it worked 50 years ago, so we want to keep doing it this way. But it's just not.
Sermons
it's
are on Memorex.
Yeah, exactly. I see what you did there. But it's not, not changing the gospel, nothing like that. We're still talking about those trappings, but you want to keep the gospel boxed in with these trappings that you did 50 years ago. And those trappings just aren't appealing to the community today. And so it's almost like you're welcome to come to our church as long as you fit in this box, and it's like, hold on a second. If that box is not the gospel, then get rid of the box, be willing to get rid of the box.
Spoiler alert, LeCrae talks about it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we have a very morbid saying in screenwriting, and it kind of has some carryover here. And the saying is, you can't be afraid to kill your babies. And what it means, please don't start. Wait to comment on that one until I explain. And now she's holding up a Facebook comment. Pam Francis says, "You guys are funny." I'm assuming you said
Pam.
that before I talked about killing babies, but thank you, Pam.
Thanks for watching, Pam.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
So here's what it means. Here's what killing your babies means. When you're writing a story, and it's specifically a screenwriting thing, but you're writing a screenplay for a movie, all right, you may write the scene that you just love as a writer. You think this is great. This is the best thing I've ever written. But then you go back afterwards and you realize, okay, but the characters don't really change from start to finish, or it doesn't advance the plot much at all, or, and so it's like, no matter how much you love it, if it doesn't serve the overall narrative, you can't be afraid. You got to be willing to get rid of it. Yeah. Same thing here. No matter how much you love something that's going on in your church, if it's not serving the gospel and serving to advance and elevate Jesus Christ, then you can't be clinging to it. You've got to be willing to get rid of it if it's not serving that purpose.
Sometimes a sacred cow is better as a hamburger.
Oh, I haven't had dinner yet either, man.
Making me hungry.
So, moving on to Brian's second comment here. He also comments, speaking of misrepresenting Jesus, I recently heard someone who I respect say the words, "Jesus was a socialist." I was dumbfounded and disappointed because I respect this person, and I think this displays a grave misunderstanding of both. And I don't know if you've ever heard that before. I've heard that comment quite a bit
as well.
What are your thoughts on it when you've heard it?
Well, from the Christian perspective, yeah, that's a grave misunderstanding, certainly of Jesus, that he says, my kingdom's not of this world. So he's not a proponent for any kind of political system, earthly political system. So, yeah, I agree again with Mr. Brownell. And as far as a misunderstanding of socialism, yeah, I'd say that as well.
Yeah, there's certainly aspects of what Jesus taught that are not compatible with socialism, and there are certain aspects of what Jesus taught that might be in common with some tenets of socialism, but you can't equate the two. Like you're saying, Jesus did not come to initiate any earthly governmental or economic system. Yeah. And I'm going to say this, I hate to break it to you folks that are diehard capitalists, and I like capitalism, it has its flaws, but I'm big on Jesus also didn't come to initiate capitalism. Okay, that's not why the only kingdom he's initiating is his kingdom.
He spoke English, he voted Republican.
But I mean, when he does talk about government, what's he talking about? He does talk about obeying the civil authorities, regardless of what kind of system they come from. unless it interferes with your first loyalty to God, obviously. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's. So when it's not that he never addressed governmental systems, but when he did, that was kind of the context. It was never to advocate for one over the other. And socialism is a form of earthly government. So Jesus, it is a misunderstanding. And what people do is they'll take, passages like those in Acts, and maybe you can tell me chapter and verse. I can't remember right now, where it's talking about the body of believers.
Chapter 2, yeah.
Yeah,
So they all
sharing
had everything in common.
Yeah. And say, well, look, that's socialism. It's like, no, that's structure of the church at that time. And now I do think there's certain things we can learn from that even today, because I think that, speaking of, things that the church maybe doesn't do like they should, I think we do tend to cling to our own possessions a little bit too much. I think mine, and not ours. But leaving that aside, that's not socialism.
I think and what this draws out as well is that when reading scripture, when reading the Bible, we have the tendency, all of us do, because we're products of our environment. None of us are born in a vacuum. We don't exist in a vacuum. And so, like it or not, we come with our own biases. Everybody does. Everybody has their own worldview, and it is in part formulated by our surroundings. And so the danger that we always have to be guarding against is, fancy word, but eisegeting. It's reading into the scripture what's not actually there. So that statement kind of points that fact out, that when we say Jesus was a socialist, well, socialism didn't exist really back then to begin with, and so we're reading into kind of what Jesus is saying, a concept.
Correct me if I'm wrong,
foreign.
but it's always been on my understanding that socialism was the idea that the government should redistribute the wealth and resources.
Yeah, I mean, it's an enforced situation.
That the government, and what Jesus is saying is that we need to take care of each other.
Yeah, there's definitely a different emphasis.
It's a difference of government versus society.
It's
in
brotherly
community,
love, not
yeah,
big
the
brother.
community, yeah.
Yeah, Jesus is asking for a change of people's hearts, not for government enforcing you to do certain actions.
Right.
There's a difference there. All right, so those are our comments from last week's episode. And just a reminder, if you are watching this but not watching us live, or watching after the fact, you can do the same. Please put your comment in the YouTube on the YouTube video in the comment section there, and we'll take a look at that. And before next week's episode, we'll revisit it and we'll answer any questions you have, respond to any comments, etc. So thank you, Brian, for participating with that this week. And with all that being said, let's move on to our first of 4 topics that we have for today. This is one that has been in the news quite a bit, and matter of fact, even more developments just today on this. I'm going to introduce this specifically from Simone Biles' situation, but obviously I think there's a broader topic we want to cover here. For those of you, if you don't know who Simone Biles is, you're obviously currently under a rock, or you don't have a television. Or I was about to say, or a computer, but you wouldn't be watching us if you didn't have some kind of electronic device. So you've probably at least heard the name Simone Biles. Simone Biles is arguably the greatest women's gymnast ever. I mean, she's phenomenal. And she was, on the U.S. Olympic team, the last Olympics, and she was on the U.S. Olympics team, obviously, this time around. And she's 24 years old, so she's actually on the older side, very much so, for a women gymnast. I know. She's just amazing. Have you ever seen? I mean, she just defies gravity. It's amazing. Well, on Tuesday, they were, if you don't know how the U.S. gymnastics works in the Olympics, or not U.S., the Olympics gymnastics works, the first thing they do is they do the team competition where, your team can accumulate.
No. The first thing they do is the qualifying round where everybody participates in every.
We're talking about when they win medals.
I know,
the first
but
medals
no,
one
but
of the teams,
no,
right?
but this is kind of germane to the topic because of the timing of her stepping down. Some people have just a little bit of an objection to that. But they start with the qualifying rounds, which she did go through, and she qualified with the United States to compete in the team competition where it's 4 people participate on each
team
apparatus. And well, no, not on the team, but on the apparatus. I think they can have up to 5 gymnasts, but only 4 perform on each apparatus, and the top 3 scores, I guess, count.
And they also qualify as individuals for individual events, which come next. So when you get to the actual competition after qualifying, they do the teams competition, And then after the teams competition, then they have individual, where you could have individual gymnasts who compete for medals on the individual apparatuses.
And
the
then
individual
you have
events.
some that are competing, two that are competing from each team, a maximum two from each team competing in the all around,
Right,
which is on all four apparatus.
which is an individual, not team, but on all four apparatus. Apparatuses,
Apparati.
apparati. Is it apparati?
I think so.
That
think.
just sounds like
Wrong.
some secret society, like the Illuminati or something.
Meese.
I don't know. So Simone Biles on Tuesday it was the first event she was doing in the team competition. It was the vault, and she went up on the vault, and a lot of people described it. She looked off. She was supposed to do 2.5 turns in the air. She actually only did 1.5 and landed, and just kind of looked a little bit kind of out of it. Not physically hurt in any way, shape, or form, but she was kind of taken off. And she came back and met with her team, and clearly had spoken to her team, and basically the decision was made that she was at that point pulling out of the team competition. Now they have alternates and other team members. So there was somebody else from the U.S. team that was able to step up and take her place, and they went on and they won the silver medal. So but Simone Biles was not part of that competition, the team competition. She described the fact that she just didn't feel like she was in the right headspace, is what she said at first. Now, since then, just so you know, the latest...
Also, she may still end up getting a medal for that because she was a part of the qualifying.
She was part of the qualifying team.
Yeah, and that usually happens.
So and the most recently, even today, she... even though she had qualified for several, the all-around, and I think maybe even all the apparatus, I can't remember, but several of them, she has also now stepped down from in any of the individual competition at all. So her Olympic journey is done for this Olympics, and being 24 years old, this is probably it. And she made some comments, after her initial withdrawal, to kind of explain some of what was going on. And one of the things she said is, I know that this Olympic Games, I wanted it to be for myself. I came here and I felt like I was still doing it for other people. So that just hurts my heart that doing what I love has been kind or taken away from me to please other people. And she just talked, she talked a lot about, she admitted there's no physical injury, but she has struggled with depression in the past. She's had therapy in the past, number of mental health challenges. And this high stress atmosphere that she was feeling in the Olympics made it, the mental struggle that she was facing difficult to overcome. She wasn't able to focus, and she got to the point where she felt that, let's face it, you're a gymnast, you're doing a lot of very, very dangerous things. And she felt like my head was not there, and she was putting herself at risk by doing it, and she felt she was putting the rest of her team at risk. Now, what I did find interesting is it wasn't limited to her. Of course, here in the U.S., she is a superstar. She is by any stretch definition of that term. And so, anytime you're doing what is it, Uber Eats commercials, you're a superstar. But it's not just her. If you were in Japan, in Tokyo, there was a tennis player, Naomi Osaka. If you follow women's tennis, you probably know the name. She's a tennis superstar, and she was favored to win the gold medal in Japan. In the Olympics, in the Tokyo Olympics. Hometown crowd, what crowds there were, because of course these venues are empty. But then in the third round, she lost pretty significantly, 6-1, 6-4. To a player from Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic. I apologize. Hasn't been Czechoslovakia for some time.
Yeah.
And that was obviously a big shock to everybody. And and she has openly said that I definitely feel like there was a lot of pressure this time around. I think it's maybe because I haven't played in Olympics before, and for the first one to be here, to be at her hometown, was a bit much. But she also talked about the immense pressure that she was feeling going into the Olympics, and that affected her play, she felt.
Curious, how old was the
Naomi Osaka?
Yeah.
I don't know if it says what her age was.
I don't think I saw that.
Yeah, on the younger side, I think.
What's her name again?
As far as
Naomi Osaka?
Yeah. But she had 18 unforced errors in her match. So anyway, that's kind of what we want to talk about. Obviously, it's news here in the U.S. with Simone Biles. Okay, I missed something here. Pastor Jay says not arguably on Facebook. When did I say arguably? I must have.
that she is the best.
Oh,
So
that
not
she is
arguably
not
the best,
arguably
she
the
is.
best. She is the best Olympic gymnast of all time, or women's gymnast of all time. And I mean,
A lot of people would say Nadia Comaneci was.
well, they might. I would,
Or Mary Lou Retton.
and maybe okay. I got to be.
But
Mary
the
Lou Retton has a great story, but
the scoring system is
different.
a lot different now. They're
I'm not
dealing
going to
with
speak
it
to Nadia
different.
Comaneci because I didn't watch her as much. I grew up in an era where I watched Mary Lou Retton. I love Mary Lou Retton. I was a young adolescent boy when she was doing it. I had a huge crush on Mary Lou Retton. Simone Biles is better than Mary Lou Retton. I'm sorry. She's better. All right. Talent-wise, she's just amazing if you watch her. So anyway, so what are your thoughts? They're both on whether it be Simone Biles or the pressure that's being
Just
put on these
FYI,
Olympic athletes.
Naomi Osaka is 23.
23.
Okay, so they're both.
You do
around
tend
the
to have a
same
longer career though in women's tennis than you do in gymnastics.
age. Yeah,
So
that's true.
She's been well, I don't know how strongly competing they do, but she's been not been playing for, well, she hasn't been with her coach for very long. I'm trying to find something that kind of indicates maybe how long she's been going. It looks like from 2011, so about 10 years.
Yeah, my thoughts on this. I understand. It's understandable to me that there's disappointment with both women, and it's not even just the two of them. I think there was another.
There's been more,
multiple. The disappointment with people feel like they let their teammates down. Directly with Simone Biles, that they could have gone to win gold, but they took silver instead. So there's kind of not only letting your team down, you let the nation down, and that is a lot of pressure. And I think for some people the inclination is to kind of jump on her for not sticking to her commitment, or not because that is something you let your yes be yes, your no be no. There's biblical principle there to stick it out. But at the same time, I want to highlight something that isn't brought up too much in Christian conversation. We talked about this a while back as far as mental health goes, and taking care of ourselves and recognizing those signs. Something that I found interesting, that, and maybe this is just speculation, that might have contributed to that. It also says that Biles is the oldest. She's the veteran on the team, and she's the only self-identified survivor of former national team Dr. Larry Nassar's crimes of sexual abuse.
who's still competing?
Who's still competing. And so, I mean, I can only imagine that that's got to have some kind of psychological.
She's got to feel the weight of that. There's almost
and so I don't fault her for the breakdown. We're human. We should not be expected to compete as robots.
I'd be interested
because an overabundance of compassion is required here.
I'd be interested. We talk about her. Yeah, some people may say that she went through the whole qualifying and she should have stuck it out, but everything, But she's right. If her head isn't in the right space, she can get really injured. I mean, they can land. She could really concussion, worse than concussion kind of thing. So she didn't walk out on her team though. I assume
she was still there with them.
She was still there, and I bet even during the individual round, she was probably up in the stands if she wasn't allowed down on the floor with the coaches. My guess is she didn't totally turn her back and walk away,
right?
Kind of thing.
Yeah, she came back. She hugged them. She had her sweatshirt on, it says, and she, they were.
But she was probably
shared some tears together, of course.
But I bet you she was coaching them through the rest of the.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to the individual because I don't know if she would have been allowed in there or not. They got a lot of COVID restrictions going on right now. But I know the team, she was still there. She was still part of the team. And she may have been there for both. Pam Francis here does say on Facebook, my heart goes out to her. And me too, Pam. And that's, now here's first of all, I'll say ditto to everything you said, so I don't want to repeat it all because I agree with all that. Here's the, I don't know, ponderous thought that, I'm crossing my arms, I know. That occurred to me as I was just thinking about the story earlier, and Mary Kay and I were talking about it along with Dave Merritt was in the office, and we were kind of chatting about it. By the way, this was Dave Merritt's the one who kind of asked us to talk about this subject.
Yeah, shout out to Dave.
Shout out, Dave. I can't help but think of instances. Well, first of all, let me preface this by saying I think by and large, while there has been some criticism of Simone Biles, I think by and large, especially in the media, the reaction has been like we've said on the show. It's been people being supportive and understanding and saying, yeah, you know what, she did as much as we would have liked to have her stay on there. Obviously, she did the right thing. She needs to take care of herself. We shouldn't be messing around mental illness. And yeah, and Mary Kay Dave gave us a specific example of the choke thing, but I can't remember who he mentioned. But it was a good example.
Wasn't he talking about Lamar Jackson?
Oh yeah, he mentioned Lamar Jackson. That you take Lamar Jackson, quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens. When he had a reputation as far as choking in the playoffs. He can't come through in the playoffs. When the pressure is high, he just chokes and he doesn't perform. And I'm looking at those two situations. And I'm thinking, when a male athlete feels the pressure and doesn't perform very well, he's choking. He can't do it. When a female athlete feels the weight of the pressure, it's like, no, we understand that the pressure can get to you. And as much as I agree that in this situation, we as a society, by and large, arrived at the correct conclusion that we should take mental illness seriously, part of me has to wonder if the way we got there was through almost some kind of a little bit of a sexism. The idea that we're more willing to get to that correct place for women because we look at them as not being as strong. But for men are you're tough and you're strong, so you just got to stick it out. And so we don't want to hear about mental illness.
And I think maybe biology has, not that I'm supporting sexism in any way, but biology, I think, kind of lends itself to men are more. Testosterone is something that you need to, perform athletically. not that you need to. That was terrible. It helps. Higher levels of.
No, you're right.
Help.
You're right. Men on the average are capable of lifting heavier objects. You tend to be taller and can reach higher and.
Our next story, transgenderism, the U.S. Olympics as far as weightlifting competitions.
Okay,
no,
stop.
We're not going to go there.
We talked on that a while back.
The other thing to bring up is that I would say in a lot of cases, particularly when there are male versus female versions of an Olympic event, so like dressage, with the horses, you have men competing against women as well, because it's just rider and horse. But when you have things like gymnastics where there's differences, and like the ice skating too, a lot of times, especially if balance is a thing that is involved in that particular sport, a lot of times the female athletes are so much younger. Their average age, not in these two women's cases that we brought up, they're older, but if you think of when they start, they tend to start so much younger. When you've got 15, 16-year-old girls that are going to the Olympics for gymnastics, where as for the men, they're usually 23, 24. Same thing with the ice skating and sometimes in some of the other sports as well. It's just a lot of pressure. You're right. It's a lot of pressure to put on somebody that age. But Pam Francis has said a couple of comments, and I just there was something that we are wired, I think, to think of men and women differently in some way, shape, or form. We just watched an old episode of Rizzoli and Isles, and spoiler alert, it's about a drug ring, and one of the major players in the drug ring was a female, and they didn't know who the person was, so they're on the board where they're connecting the dots is this obvious outline of a male, but it's blacked out. It's a silhouette of a male, so there's this person that they don't know who it is. They're all assuming it's male. They find out it's actually a female. And one of the characters actually said something interesting. She goes, "Why am I more disappointed that it was a female that was involved in this Why did I assume that this person had to be a male? I'm finding that I'm thinking that I have some underlying sexism in the way I've been raised to think.
I think also it's a statistical
Yeah.
outlier, but yeah.
Yeah, and
just not typically.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
And Pam does say here, she says women and men are wired differently, and that is true. This is what your point. Women and men there are differences, and we need to acknowledge and recognize those differences. I guess my thought process just comes back to, it's like, but there's also some commonalities, and men and women certainly both can suffer from depression, both can feel pressure, and it just made me start thinking, wondering if, and I'm not, people don't take that to say I'm saying, oh, reverse sexism, look, they're discriminating against men. That's not what I'm saying. I'm actually trying to say the actual opposite, that I wonder if there's still some sexist attitudes against women, and seeing women as not being as capable as men, which allows people to be willing to come to this conclusion for women when they wouldn't for men. The conclusion should be comfort through for both,
It's called the soft discrimination of low expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're good. Yeah. And so that, I don't know, it's just a thought that occurred to me. And of course, in this context, it also made me start thinking, and I mistakenly thought it was an Olympic story. It's not Olympics. It's the European Handball Association, whatever. The other thing that just came up recently, where the team from Norway was competing in a bronze medal match. They had the European Beach Handball Association, I guess, their championships, and they have rules about, you have men's teams and you have women's teams, and the men's teams wear, shorts and tank tops, whereas the female athletes
think basketball
Yeah.
uniform, because so long loose shorts, and the tank top's pretty long too, and
whereas the female athletes, according to the rules, female athletes must wear bikini bottoms that are a close fit, cut on an upward angle toward the top of the leg, and the side depth on the side of their leg must be no more than 10 centimeters. Basically, bikini bottoms is what they had to wear. Tight tops.
but the
and bikini
tops
bottoms.
are supposed to be bikini tops that resemble sports bras that have a wide, how do they phrase, I'm trying to remember how they phrase it, but it had to be a wide hole to allow movement
So anyway,
of the arms, so they couldn't be like really closely cut to
Right.
the arm.
The Norwegian women's team, when they were in the bronze, they obeyed the rules all the way up, and they'd asked permission ahead of time, and they were denied to wear essentially like biker shorts, still tight shorts, but biker shorts. They were denied permission to do that. They got to the bronze medal match. They did it anyway, and they came out and they wore the bikini shorts, and surprise, surprise, they were fined as a result for wearing the shorts. And I don't know, I hear that story, and that
I want to throw down the other piece of knowledge. Back close to 2000 or so, the men involved in the league actually petitioned the league for more form-fitting outfits themselves because of the sand getting into the uniforms, which is what they claim is the reason why the women have to wear close-fitting items. But then when the men asked for it, they denied them.
Yeah, it's a double standard.
It's a-
for
yeah.
sure.
You think?
And so I do think that there are still some, sexist attitudes out there in the athletic arena. And I don't know. This is what got me thinking about that a lot.
Yeah, and I think and the only piece of information that because I hadn't read that article, but I heard about it, and I heard I think Pink, the artist,
Right.
went ahead and she was, I think, paying for their fine.
She
or
offered
whatever.
to pay for it.
Offered to
She's
pay
not
for
going to
it.
have to.
Yeah.
The Norwegian handball, so whatever, their national association is going to pay it. But yeah, the team members were saying things like, well, it's like, well, we don't need you to pay the fine, but maybe we can all get together and have a photograph, or
Photo op.
go to a concert.
Right. But yeah, I think if nothing else, this does highlight that double standard, and again, that's a form of discrimination that we see among athletes, men and women athletes, and man, that whole arena right now is not on the Olympic level, but even down to your high school or junior high level. When we talked about in a previous episode about allowing trans athletes, you joked about the next segment being that, but I mean, it's all kind of connected with when you start having those double standards, then, or when you continue to permit it, then it kind of devalues the athletes that are competing, and then throw in the other aspect of allowing biological men to compete with females, and that's a whole other topic. But it's
Pastor Jay says we're squirreling.
I just assumed he was advocating for his favorite woodland creature, the squirrel. He just wants to.
Well, there is that too.
I am partial to black bears because you find them in up on Skyline Drive. Ever tell you the story, speaking of squirrel, how I chased a baby black bear?
No.
I actually did. Yeah, this was stupid. So don't do this at home. No, we were. I'm gonna tell it anyway. Tough, you can't stop me. There was a. We were up on Skyline Drive, the family, and we see they have little railings on this. Don't mute my mic.
See what you started, Pastor Jay?
So we were there. They have the little guardrails on the side, and we saw.
And it wasn't just him; it was his dad too.
Yeah, and so we saw a little baby black bear like peeking over the edge of the guardrail, but then it kind of ducked down, and so we wanted to get a picture of the baby black bear. So we jumped out of the car. No, we didn't all, but the stupid men did. We jumped.
His mom and I were staying in the car,
and we ran after the baby black bear to try to get a picture, and we didn't catch it. The baby black bear was gone into the woods, but it was only afterwards we realized that there was a baby black bear. There was probably a mama black bear that'd be very angry to see two people chasing her baby. Right. So yeah, it wasn't smart, but that's what I just love black bears. So just like you love squirrels, I love black bears.
Did I ever tell you about the first time we went down to Tennessee for a family vacation? We had a rental van. And it was one of those ones where the key fob, if it was close enough, you didn't have to push any buttons. All you had to do was tap the door handle and the door would open. And so we had the key fob inside our cabin, and the van was parked right outside. And a bear had figured out how to put its paw up there and was able to get into our van. And so all we could do was just sit there and watch. I mean, it's about to drive away or something. It didn't do any damage. It just chewed up the gum that was in the center console and spat it back out, which was very rude.
We do have a comment here from Tiana Rush. Mary Kay, if you wouldn't mind, she's in need of some baby milk. Looks like for her 9-month-old son. Can you post on there the food closet hours? Tiana, if you're local to us, you can come by. Sometimes we do have some things at our food closet.
Come by tomorrow.
Come by. Yeah, that's right. We're open tomorrow. I always forget the 3:30 to 5, right? Tomorrow, 3:30 to 5, 1100 Philadelphia Road. Mary Kay will type it in the comments section so you have it all right there. We'd be happy to try to help you out. Come on by. We'll see what we can do. All right. Yeah. All right, so let's move on. Speaking of squirrels, Mary Kay, I just had her typing something, but now I'm going to have her change the lower third graphic so she can do two things at once. Let's move on to our next story. Ben, what's our next story?
All right, so again, unless you've been living under a rock, you're familiar with the ice cream company, Ben & Jerry's. That's been, for me, the brunt of several jokes, but because I share a name with that. But no, Ben & Jerry's has been known throughout the years for their social activism. They've been involved with a lot of different organizations, and they're not very quiet. Just including different causes: marriage equality, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, all of these. But their latest cause that they've decided to attach themselves to is the so-called occupation of, or unlawful occupation of Jews in Palestine. So what Ben & Jerry's has decided to do is that they have made the decision to, quote, end sales of our ice cream in occupied Palestinian territories. So they released a statement, and they said, "We also hear and recognize the concerns shared with us by our fans and trusted partners. We have a long-standing partnership with our licensee. Their licensee is actually, what's the name of them? Not Ben & Jerry's proper, but they have a licensee, so they operate over in Israel and Palestine. But so they've made the decision not to renew that license when it expires at the end of next year.
It's like a franchise agreement, basically.
Yeah, effectively. So it's no longer going to be sold not in Israel. They're going to still sell it in Israel because it says we will stay in Israel through a different arrangement. We'll share an update on that as soon as we're ready. But it will not be sold in what they're calling occupied Palestinian territory, specifically, I think, Jerusalem.
The West Bank and East Jerusalem.
The West Bank. Right. And so that's caused, understandably, an uproar, and interestingly, a pretty unanimous uproar from at least the political parties in Israel. We did talk about it on a previous episode, the recent ousting of Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister. And so now his replacements, pretty much unanimously, even former Prime Minister Netanyahu have all kind of rallied around this as effectively what amounts to anti-Semitism. And, it kind of it's a window into how, first of all, how Israel does not take kindly to this boycott, soft boycott. They're equating it to the BDS movement, which is a Palestinian-run movement. If you're unfamiliar with what BDS stands for, it's boycott, divestment, sanctions. So it's effectively when corporations, international corporations, boycott and make a political statement by refusing to do business in a certain area, effectively trying to put political pressure on that country to make some kind of change. So the change here that Ben & Jerry's is calling for is that they're not recognizing Israel's so-called occupation of Palestinian territory, and some are on the side of Ben & Jerry's, at least in the States. Some are not. So the Texas governor, surprise, surprise, is against Ben & Jerry's. I just want to read the one quote that he has because I thought it was kind of humorous. Trying to remember which article it was under.
There's a lot of articles on this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of articles on this one. Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar issued a statement basically saying that they're going to put them under or look into putting them under a watch list of corporations that discriminate against Israel. But, here it is. The Texas governor said, I would also note that Texans have better options for a sweet treat this summer. Bluebell was founded in Brenham, Texas, and for my money, tastes much better than the stuck-up stuff made by a foreign-owned company started in Vermont.
How do you really feel, Governor?
Yeah, really leaving no room for misinterpretation there. So that's kind of the long and short of it.
Well, what's interesting is there's a number of states, 30 states in the United States, that have some kind of law on the books that I don't know what the consequences of these laws are supposed to be, but in one way, shape, or form, they basically speak against any company participating in this BDS movement. Now what becomes interesting about it, and so the question is, well, now is this going to cost Ben & Jerry's? Are these, at least some of these 30 states, Texas governor spoken out about it, Florida governor spoken out about it, are they going to take some kind of action that's going to really hurt, Ben & Jerry's in their pocketbook? Because I mean, what they're doing in Israel is really not going to hurt them that much. It's like they're less than 10% of the market share for ice cream in Israel to begin with. So it's like, we all think Ben & Jerry's here. Everybody knows Ben & Jerry's. Apparently not so much in Israel. They're not that big to begin with. But
the uproar is about the statement it makes, not
the statement
sales,
it makes.
yeah.
And so the first question is whether or not you're going to see some of these states in the U.S. start to take action against them. But here's where the rubber meets the road, and here's where I think that the discussion really takes place. Is this, because here's where people disagree. Is this the same as that BDS movement? Because, and those people that are supportive of what Ben & Jerry's has done here would say they're not boycotting all of Israel, so it's not really anti-Semitic. They're just boycotting these particular sections, these Israeli occupied territories, as their political statement, but they're not pulling out of Israel as a whole. The flip side of the coin is those that disagree with Ben & Jerry's will say, but by doing that, by withdrawing and not selling in these particular territories, what you're doing is you're adding legitimacy to this movement that, let's face it, the end goal is not just to remove the removal of Israel from these territories. The ultimate objective is the removal of Israel, period. And so there's the deep question that I'm going to bounce it right back to you right off the bat, because see how I did that? So you thought that you were going to get me talking a lot, and you said it, and I was going to bounce it right back. It's like a good tennis player. Boom, right back at you.
You're not in the proper uniform.
Is it the same? Is them saying we're going to not sell in these particular locations the moral equivalent of saying we're not going to deal with Israel?
Before I answer that question,
no,
serve. No,
we're going to go through this whole topic. We're never going to answer that question. He's going to bounce it back to me, and we're just no.
No, I actually highlighted a few things here that I thought were good points, but I just want to give a shout out to wherever you found this. There's apparently a dairyreporter.com That's where this one article comes from the Dairy Reporter. I forgot to
When
mention
you
that.
really want your ice cream news. I mean, is there
Yeah.
really that much to talk about?
That's- anyway, I just thought that was funny. But yeah, so some of the points that were made here is so actually some Jewish people, despite the widespread political opposition to Ben and Jerry's statement, some have said that this is not the same, that it's effectively, working toward peace. Basically, the statement that Ben and Jerry's is making is that they're not recognizing the occupation here because it's working against the peace agreements there. The opposition to that I thought was kind of poignant was that, first of all, it kind of, well, I'll just read this because they do a better job than I would. It says, even those who still pay lip service to the theoretical desire for a two-state solution, that's Israel and Palestine, to end the conflict with Palestinians, understand that the old Green Line border between Israel and the West Bank will never be resurrected. So basically they're saying it's a moot point. There's no longer, they've made it clear, especially in Jerusalem and its suburbs, even in the theoretical solution of a two-state agreement, Jerusalem is always going to be contested territory. That even if Israel recognizes Jerusalem being owned by Palestine, there's still going to be pockets and suburbs of Jerusalem that Jews are going to live there.
Well, yeah, you're not going to uproot. That's after 67 years. You're not going to uproot people. It's like, so even if you're going to have a two-state solution, it's going to have to be a two-state solution that recognizes people living where they're living.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. And so that's kind of, they're saying that's not really a valid point, that it's going against the peace agreements because, well, as we've seen in history, peace in the Middle East, especially Jerusalem, it's highly, highly contested. And I don't think there's a simple solution to it. And so that kind of gets around, the question.
I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine that? I mean, if we have a two-state solution, just think about what that's saying. We're going to go into this territory, and based upon your nationality, based upon your race, we're going to uproot you from your home and displace you.
Pretty much the definition of apartheid.
I mean, yeah. So that's why I agree. That's kind of a naive solution. That's not happening,
Right.
So
we need a more robust solution, which I think Ben and Jerry's sort of misses the point on that. It's not as cut and dry as just saying, oh, we're not going to serve you here, so that we'll pressure you into agreeing to a theoretical two-state solution. It's more complicated than that. Right. And I think that's kind of the point that what Ben and Jerry's is trying to do sort of misses. And then the other statement here, they say, and the utter irrationality of a move that would deny both Jews and Arabs
I'm going to point this out too.
in parts of Jerusalem.
Like, who do you think you're denying your ice cream to?
Right, Jews and Arabs both. If it's a contested territory, that means both Jews and Arabs, Jews and Palestinians, are living there.
Yeah.
So you're removing ice cream from both of them. So
Pam Francis says, no ice cream for me.
Some progressive Jewish groups have mobilized in support of the company's boycott plans. So this is what I was talking about. There's liberal groups, including Americans for Peace Now, J Street, the New Israel Fund, that basically support it as a principled decision that's not incompatible with support for Israel. So basically saying, yeah, keep doing it. It doesn't really hurt Israel because you're just not serving both Jews and Arabs, but you're still serving Israel over here.
But that gets to what you were saying before. It's largely a symbolic. There's no practical teeth to this at all. It's not like a boycott where, you hear boycotts where you want to like punish someone in their pocketbook by having them, if we don't buy your product, you're really going to feel at the bottom line. There's really very little practical impact to this at all. It's really just their statement, their symbolic statement that they're trying to make. What I did find interesting.
All right, so how do we as Christians respond?
Well, we're getting there. No, what I did find interesting though is that when they say that you read at the beginning of the story, it's like, well, they're saying they're just pulling out of these particular territories and they're going to remove their relationship with this particular licensee who I guess presumably was selling everywhere throughout Israel. And they said, but don't worry, we're not pulling out entirely. We're still going to deal with Israel. We'll let you know what those
through another means.
We'll let you know what that's going to be down the road. I'm very interested to know what that other means is, because my understanding from at least one of these articles is in Israel, it's illegal to deny to only sell to certain geographic regions, only be willing to sell to certain geographic regions. So you're not going to find another legal contractual relationship, for the sounds of it, that's going to allow you to market your product just to what you were considering Israel proper and not to the contested territories. That's illegal in Israel. So how exactly does Ben and Jerry's think they're going to do this? That's kind of beyond me, so.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's part of we'll let you know. I mean,
we don't know yet.
Sounds to me, yeah, it's not finalized. So
Which just shows from a business standpoint how short-sighted it was as well. You don't have a plan, then don't make an announcement.
Right.
But okay, but let's get back on track to Mary Kay's trying to get us back, and I'm going to try to I want to be specific about this because the allegation is that a lot of people say it's anti-Semitic, that this is an anti-Semitic thing. Is it? And I'll be honest with you, I could listen to arguments either way because. Well, here's what I find interesting. All right, another thing I find interesting. A lot of the same people who I hear speaking in support of Ben and Jerry's right now are the same people who, a few years back, when the United States Supreme Court had a decision that said that corporations have First Amendment rights and can contribute to political campaigns or whatever it may be, we're saying corporations aren't people, corporations shouldn't have a voice. It's like, no, what you really mean is you just don't like them having a voice by means of contributing to political campaigns, but you do want them to be able to have a voice when it comes to things like Ben and Jerry. So if it's a cause you agree with, yes, they can have a voice. As a matter of fact, we see an increasing movement, I think, in the last few years in our country, where corporations are being increasingly pressured to make political statements and agree with us on this political stance.
So the whole voting, Coca-Cola and all of those other corporations with the whole voting fiasco that's still going on.
It's still going on. And we talked about that in a show a little while ago. And I just kind of wish for the days when I just, what I get from an ice cream company is ice cream, but that's, I do think we're seeing increased pressure on these private companies to have a voice. And so I did find that kind of interesting. It's like, well, wait a minute. So it's sometimes come out of the same person's mouth. It's like, well, you don't think corporations are people, so they shouldn't have the right to express a political opinion. And yet you're championing Ben and Jerry's expressing their political opinion in what we've all acknowledged is purely a symbolic move. It's really not going to have any other impact other than that. You can't have it both ways. And I do think, legally speaking, I think they should have the right, because corporations are nothing other than collections of individuals. They should have the right to express their opinions. I just kind of wish they would do it less, because I just want to get back to ice cream being ice cream.
Yeah, and let's face it, nobody goes to Ben and Jerry's for their political rhetoric. Nobody goes anywhere for to purchase anything for.
But I guess that's the underlying question though. Is it the same? Is Ben and Jerry, is it a fair criticism against Ben and Jerry's to say, I know Ben and Jerry's, you're trying to say this isn't anti-Israel because you're still planning on dealing with Israel by and large. You're just pulling out of these territories to make a statement that you don't think they're legitimately occupying these territories. Whereas the response to that is being, well, no, we think that essentially when you do that though, Ben and Jerry's, you're kind of validating these claims that are really being made against Israel as a whole. So, I mean, is it a fair criticism of Ben and Jerry's that they're really, even though they're trying to just make this narrow statement, in practice they're actually making one that's much broader?
And that's the rub. I think that I think is a good point that even though it may not be full on BDS, it coins the term BDS light. That they're trying to make a political statement, but in effect, what that statement is saying, just like you had alluded to, is that Palestine has made it clear that they're not going to be like any occupation.
We'll get to Pastor Jay's statement in a second. I saw it. Sorry.
They made it clear that any occupation is illegitimate. And so, and just like we've said before, you're not going to uproot families either. So I think it is, even if it's not a full-fledged boycott of Israel as a country, like we still recognize them as a nation. But yeah, you're kind of turning the knife a little bit. So maybe it's not a machete, but it's a pocket knife.
Well, and it gets to recurring. And by the way, what he said was, I would buy political rhetoric ice cream. I assume it would be full of nuts.
Nice.
But I think it gets to a broader. This is Mary Kay. You're asking, how should we as Christians approach something like this? And this is, I think, the broader lesson that folks at Ben and Jerry should learn from all of this. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because I have no reason not to. That their intention was not to be anti-Israel as a whole. It was really just to make this political statement about this particular isolated issue. That's all well and good. But we always, getting back to the empathy that we should always have for other people, even those with whom we disagree, we should, before we act, try to ask ourselves, okay, this is what I want to communicate. But if this is the method by which I choose to communicate that, how is it going to be interpreted? Now, that's not to say that you always need to, dictate what you're going to say about how someone else is going to take it. You shouldn't. Some people are just overly sensitive and whatever. But what I am saying is, if there is an alternative means to communicate the same message without the risk of it being misinterpreted and be taken by someone in a very negative manner, then maybe that should cause us to reconsider the method by which we're communicating. And I think there certainly are other ways Ben and Jerry could have communicated this message other than this, which clearly was going to start people thinking of this boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. You know,
if nothing else, it's bad timing because this is tensions are very high right now with what's been going on in Jerusalem, and so I think I agree with what you just stated. Obviously, we need to have, as Christians, empathy, and it does demonstrate on the part of Ben and Jerry's a lack of empathy for.
And just a lack of foresight, lack of thinking about how it's going to come out. Yeah,
for how Israelites are going to take it. Again, doesn't hurt them really at all, or has no real teeth to it. But the strong visceral reaction should tell us that that's immediately where their minds have gone.
Yeah, and I do think as Christians we also should at least evidence to the unless there's evidence to the contrary, we should give them the benefit of the doubt in saying when they say this is what our intention was. Okay, I'm going to believe that that's what your intention was because I have no reason to think otherwise.
So we all can go out and buy Ben and Jerry's if we really want.
I don't buy Ben and Jerry's. That's a thing. Maybe that's influencing my opinion here. I've never been a fan of Ben and Jerry's. Do they have? Okay,
I have.
I know. I need a Ben and Jerry's fan out there to tell me. Look, not just my favorite, but objectively the favorite flavor of ice cream. Anybody that knows me has heard me say this. I think I just said it in the vision meeting earlier this week.
Mint chocolate chip.
Mint chocolate chip. Thank you. It is. See, I did say it. It is objectively the best flavor of ice cream out there. Does Ben and Jerry's make a mint chocolate chip type ice cream, and what do they call it?
It's got to be one of their flavors. I don't know.
It's got to be. And they probably call it,
political rhetoric.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's not full of nuts though. It's full of chocolate. I was about to say because it's full of nuts and it looks like green puke. No. Did you know that mint chocolate chip ice cream is not actually naturally green? Those that you see that are green, that's an artificial color.
They make mint chocolate chunk ice cream.
Mint chocolate chunk?
Close.
Well, I just like chips, not chunks. So
I think if they were
They're
to make
fudge chunk.
if Ben and Jerry's were to make a political rhetoric ice cream, it should have just a beautiful package, but when you open up it, it's empty.
Makes all the promises and doesn't deliver.
All the promise but doesn't deliver. Yeah, exactly. All right. Let's move on to our third story, shall we? All right. So our third story today comes out of Iowa, actually. There's a federal court of appeals, and I can't remember which circuit governs Iowa, but I will say, just so everybody understands, this is not a United States Supreme Court case. This is a federal appellate court, which means it's the level right below the Supreme Court. So it's binding on the states in that area, but not necessarily binding on those outside of that area. Other circuit courts of appeals can make their own decision on it, but it is what it is. So what happened here is the University of Iowa it's had a number, obviously like any college, they have a number of student groups on there. One of those student groups was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and they'd been on the University of Iowa campus for, I think they said like 25 years. Something like that. They've done a lot of service projects, things like that. Now understand the way InterVarsity works is anyone, you don't even have to be a Christian to be a part of the group. All right, anyone's welcome. You can come in, you can listen, you can listen to their Bible studies, you can come to their activities. However, the one requirement, that faith-based requirement they do have, is that in order to be a leader in the group, especially like if you're going to be leading one of the Bible studies or something like that, you got to be a Christian. They don't want a non-Christian leading their Bible studies. Well, in the summer of 2018, the University of Iowa sent InterVarsity a notice that said that this group's leadership requirement was in violation of their university policy. What university policy, you may ask? Well, there's the irony. We're dripping with irony now. The university policy that they violated was the policy against religious discrimination. So the very policy that was supposed to protect groups like InterVarsity Christian Fellowship was now being used to tell them that they were in danger of getting kicked off campus. Tim Foster says, what? Most apostate American churches are led by non-Christians. Well, that's speaking of squirrel. There's that rabbit hole we could certainly go down. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, the InterVarsity Fellowship, Christian Fellowship, didn't want to go that way. But yeah, we can talk about the state of American, especially American Christianity today. Maybe we'll bring that up on a future show, because you got a point. But InterVarsity was saying they wanted them to be leaders to embrace the Christian faith. University of Iowa said, no, you're discriminating against all religious groups by requiring that only people of your religious group can be leaders in your organization. Now,
Which is a religious group.
Which is a religious group.
Yeah.
This was not thereafter limited to Christian groups. What happened is, right after they kind of get on InterVarsity, they start attacking other groups like the Imam Mahdi organization, which is a Muslim group, the Sikh Awareness Club, the Chinese Student Christian Fellowship. Obviously, that one was a Christian group. But what they did is they kind of put all these groups on their watch list.
What was the second one you
The Sikh Awareness Group? Sikhism.
Okay.
Yeah. They put them on a watch list of groups that were facing derecognition by the university. And here's where it gets even more interesting. University of Iowa had 579 registered student groups on their campus. The only groups that were put on this watch list were religious groups. The only ones. Other groups, I don't know, fraternities, sororities, they were given special exemptions to limit their membership to males or females. Political and ideological groups were still allowed to say, in order to have a leadership position in our group, you've got to agree with our political ideology. Their scholarship, mentoring, student activity programs were still allowed to discriminate based on race, sex, other protected categories. And so clearly, the University of Iowa was singling out religious groups and saying you can't have any religious criteria in order to for even your leadership in your positions. Otherwise, you're discriminating based upon religion, and therefore we're going to derecognize you. Fortunately, the Court of Appeals said no. And what's interesting about this, it wasn't just the Court of Appeals decision saying the University of Iowa can't do this. See, normally, if you're an official at a state university and you're trying to make these kind of some close constitutional calls, we don't want to tie the hands of university officials completely. And so we understand there's going to be things that are going to come up that maybe you can't quite figure out what the right way to go is on this. And so we want you to make the decision, let the court sort it out afterwards, and you personally, not the university, but the individual person themselves, you'll have what's called qualified immunity. People won't be able to sue you in your individual capacity. They'll only be able to sue the university for the decisions you make on the kind of those close constitutional calls. In this case, what makes this most significant is that the court said they don't have that liability, that immunity. And so this is so obvious and so clear that they shouldn't have been doing this, and so obviously discrimination based on religion alone, considering no other groups were being put on this watch list, that guess what, university officials, you can be sued in your individual capacity, so you better start, putting all your money in offshore accounts. No, that's not. Anyway, so.
Okay, just as a reminder to the people who haven't had American government for a while. So in order to, you said this was right below the Supreme Court.
Yes.
So what other courts did it go through to get to them?
It goes to, the way the federal court system works is your trial courts, generally speaking, are what are called United States district courts. And you have, that's where you have your jury trials and your bench trials and things like that. And there's a whole bunch of those all around the country. We've got two in Maryland, where there's one in Baltimore, there's one in Greenbelt.
You said district?
District, called the United States District Court.
Okay, so presumably these students, these organizations brought this to a district court.
They would have had to, yes.
And the district court said, nah, the University of Iowa had the right to do what they did.
Not necessarily, because the issue here was really this qualified immunity issue. And so the district court may have said, for instance, No, Iowa couldn't do that, but these individuals still enjoy qualified immunity. And so that might have been, this article isn't clear about what the actual issue was that was appealed to the next level.
Okay.
It may have just been the immunity issue. I'm not sure, but the next level up then are these the Court of Appeals for the blank circuit, whatever circuit, the Fourth Circuit, Sixth Circuit, whatever. The DC Circuit has its own circuit. I don't know what circuit Iowa is in. So that's your first level of appeal. At the appellate court, you don't have a new trial or anything like that. There's no jury. You're just arguing legal issues. Like at appellate court, you can't, if you're a criminal and you're convicted because they think you're the one that shot the person.
So this is the second level?
This is the intermediate level, right? You can't argue the appellate court, but I really didn't do it. The jury just thought I did, and they were wrong. You can only argue legal issues, where there's some procedural error made, some legal error that was made. And then from then on, the next step would be to the United States Supreme Court. And of course, the United States Supreme Court doesn't have to take your case. You have to file a writ and get their
okay. So
yada, yada, yada.
So they went through one court because they obviously want to go after the one person or several
maybe
staff members who made the decision.
Yeah, to me at least seems like that's one of the two options. Either the district court could have ruled in favor of University of Iowa, which seems unlikely, or probably what's more likely is that they ruled in favor of the InterVarsity Christian InterVarsity, and now they went to the appeals court to seek
over the immunity issue. Keep in mind, they could have completely won below, and the University of Iowa may have appealed it. I mean, that's the other possibility.
Okay.
University may have won on both issues, saying university can be held liable and the individuals can be held liable. But then the university and the individuals might have appealed it, and the Court of Appeals may have said, we agree with what the lower court did. I'm not sure this article says one way or another what the lower court did. So,
yeah. So as far as qualified immunity and the Christian perspective,
yeah, there we go.
Say we were in the case of InterVarsity. Say we were members that were actively discriminated by University of Iowa, and we just got this news that the individuals of University of Iowa, the individual decision makers, no longer have qualifying immunity. What should we as Christians do? How should we respond?
Well,
you
gotta
smell
remember
the blood in the water and go after it. Man. I mean, isn't that like Revelation 26?
No. Okay. It's no longer Shark.
That was sarcasm.
It's no longer Shark Week. Back up. So, yeah, even though it was this particular club that brought the case.
InterVarsity, I believe.
Yeah, or was it all of them? Because they were really fighting for more than just their rights.
Mm-hmm.
I think InterVarsity was the party in the case, but this was evidence in the case that they had all these other groups that they did the same thing to.
All right, well, let's just remember when we're figuring out what the Christian perspective is that we're also fighting for those other groups as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because let's face it, the decision wasn't going to be made just for the Christian group. Or just this Christian group, because there were other Christian groups involved too.
And also not just on University of Iowa. This says at the end of this article, Beckett, I guess was the...
Tim Foster said, there is not a Revelation 26.
Okay, I meant chapter 20, verse 6, but it's still not there.
All right, Pastor Jay asks, what does having, quote, club status gain them, and could they still meet without the status?
Good question.
Right.
I'll let you finish your thought first, and I'll answer that, because I do know the answer to that one.
Right. I'm just saying it was a broader issue than even just on the campus of University of Iowa. So the same attorneys that handled this has handled dozens, it says, of less extreme situations nationwide. Both collegiate and high school officials have harassed religious student groups over leadership policies, and that's California, Florida, New York, Texas, Washington. So it's more widespread of an issue. I think it's more of a principle thing. But certainly this is a blatant, easy win.
Yeah, and this story stands out to me. For those of you that don't know, there was a time in my earlier apologetic career where I was actually accepted as an apologist with an organization called Ratio Christi. And what Ratio Christi does is they actually set up clubs on different college campuses around the country. And I was going to set one up here at the University of Delaware. It didn't end up working because at the time I was still working downtown Baltimore, and the University of Delaware, while about equidistant from my home as Baltimore is, it's in the opposite direction. And so I just couldn't get the timing to work. But I was going to start a club at the University of Delaware. And one of the things that when I went through all their training and everything, one of the things in the training that they talk about was that all of this kind of case law was really at the height at that point in time, where they were saying, look, we've got lawyers. We will, if the university says they're not going to let you be an approved, recognized university or organization, because we do have they have the same requirement that to be, anybody can come, but to be leadership, you have to be Christian. And they would defend it and fight and all that. So I kind of went through a lot of training on this, even though I never got to that point where I was sponsoring a club myself or leading a club myself. But to Pastor Jay's question, what does having club status gain them? On most universities, it's this. Number one, use of university facilities. So you could meet in a university classroom after hours or things like that, which obviously makes your club or organization more accessible, especially if the university is largely an on-campus residential university. Maybe not as much if it's a commuter campus, but if most of the students are actually living there in dorms and things like that. Having a location on campus obviously makes it easier for them to get to and from. The other thing that having club status gets you sometimes is money. Lots of times universities have certain funds for the clubs, and it gets divvied up evenly among the different clubs, so there might be some money involved. But the other thing it gets you, and probably the most important of all, is participation at university events. So if you show up, if you're new on a university campus, there's lots of times there's like a club fair or something that happens, first thing in September, to let all the students know, here's the different clubs, the options, the fraternities are there, the sororities are there, all of that. And it's just a freshman feeding frenzy, we're trying to grab on the new freshmen.
It's not Shark Week.
Not Shark Week. But if you're a recognized organization, you get to participate in all those things. So it basically, in a lot of universities, recognized versus not recognized can make a significant difference in life or death of the organization, just in your ability to get the word out about your organization.
Is there any advertising?
Well, that's the next thing I was going to say. There could be restrictions on who can post on, for example, campus billboards and
whether you're included on their websites or
right. And so people go to the university website to search for what organizations they have there. If you're not approved, they won't even know your organization exists. So are there necessary advantages? No, not necessary advantages, because we got one thing that they can't ever take away, and that's the power of the Holy Spirit. Are there earthly advantages, if you want to call it? Yes, there are. Now here's what I keep thinking. We talk about a Christian perspective on all this. And again, if anybody doesn't know, I was joking about smelling the blood in the water. Okay. I look at this from a Book of Acts perspective, and I try to go back and remember, some of our reaction to this type of thing happening is born out of how spoiled, frankly, we are in this country. How blessed, if you want to call it that. Because, the early church certainly did not have the blessing of its governmental overlords, and yet they still had the church, and so we do need to, I think, have a sense of humility when looking at these kind of things, especially when we find ourselves looking at this with a sense of extreme outrage. How dare they? How could they? This is the most evil thing to happen in 15 billion years. It's open and horrible persecution. It's, in this case, not just anti-Christian, it's anti-religion, and it clearly is an anti-religion sentiment. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming of that. But in the grand scheme of persecutions that the church has faced over the years, this is,
relatively mild.
Relatively mild. All right, so we need to keep that in mind. That the church certainly has thrived in societies where there's no such thing as freedom of speech. That being said, there's still an injustice that was done here, and so I do think that They did what they were supposed to do. This as far as defending their rights, and making sure that they, as an organization, had the right to pursue and hold the clubs just like anybody else did. That's what our legal system is for. I have no problem with them availing themselves of that legal system and getting what they should out of it. Now you get to, well, then should I pursue a case that says I should be able to hold these administrators personally liable? I start to have a little bit more of an issue with that from a Christian perspective. You want to give me the counter argument to that? Okay, to my position, okay, the counter argument would be, okay, but this is going to make sure they take it seriously. If they know that they can be handled personally liable, they're going to be a lot more hesitant to do this, so that we won't have to keep coming back over and over again with these litigation cases to say, that you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this. Especially because this has happened in many, many campuses. So much so that I had to get trained in Ratio Christi to expect this, because these college campuses were doing this all over the country. All right.
Well, there's a lot of history that colleges do that to anybody who has religious beliefs. You know, we've talked about, and Pastor Jay's going to think this is a squirrel, but we've seen, you know, instances where people were losing their job for even mentioning intelligent design. They're not even going into religion.
Right.
They're just going into the idea that there's evidence of an intelligence behind our universe. So the other thing is that these people, arguably, these individuals or group of individuals that made this decision, used their personal beliefs, their personal thoughts about religious organizations to make this decision. So why shouldn't they be personally liable?
There, but for the grace of God, go I.
I know.
And so that's where I think I draw the line. It's like, I have no problem whatsoever with them taking the university to court to make sure they get their equal treatment under the law as they're supposed to. I start to question whether you go to court to get a ruling that they can be personally held liable, but I'm still willing to live with that, because I get the broader issue. Whether or not they should then actually pursue personal damages against these individuals, especially when the university already has to recognize you. You got it. You know,
That's the win already.
Yeah. Then I'm kind of like, you know, does that detrimentally impact our witness for Christ? And I tend to think the answer there is probably yes, it does. And so because we've got to be trying to win those souls too, you know?
Yeah, I know.
And if those souls don't, all they see about Christianity is a bunch of Christians came and bankrupted them and took their house away from them, forget any chance of, you know, them being open to the Holy Spirit. You know,
Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but repay them evil for good.
Can you in a court case like that just request for them to not be allowed to make these decisions anymore? You can keep your job, you can keep your house. I don't want your money. I just don't want you to be in the position where you can make these decisions. Okay, but as a practical matter,
they're getting fired if the court actually rules that. You know, because they're useless in their job, but they don't have the ability to make decisions they need to make. Then what use are they to the university? You know. But that's exactly why I say I'm at least, while it bothers me, I'm at least open to the fact that you went to court and got this ruling, because it, in theory, then acts as a disincentive, so that yes, you're still in those jobs, but you know darn well that this is hanging over your head, so do the right thing.
Right. So as Christians, maybe we shouldn't pursue that, but if one of these Muslim groups want to,
you know what?
I'm kidding.
I disavow. I'm kidding.
No, but you're not wrong though.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong. We're speaking
it from a Christian perspective, and we do not speak to a Muslim perspective or a Sikh perspective. So there you go. All right.
Maybe if you mess with them too much, they might come after you though. I don't know.
Let's go to our last story now. Now.
All right, our final story here tonight is from the Christian Post. You're probably familiar with the Christian rap and hip hop artist LeCrae, and he recently released an album. When was that released? Not long ago. It was post-COVID. It was because the album he released, he wanted it to be a statement of, you know, telling it like it is. That's kind of his words. So he wanted it to be kind of a tell-all kind of album where he's really putting his heart out there and feelings of, you know, what's been going on and the struggles with through the pandemic and just struggles recently. The album's titled Restoration, and so LeCrae was in an interview with NGEN Radio, kind of talking about this new album. And during the course of that interview, he started to share how he's feeling and how he's described himself as he was deconstructing moved from deconstructing his faith to reconstructing his faith. And in his words, he says, "I love Jesus, but I'm not churchy." So he talks about a lot in the Christian culture in America specifically, and his kind of indictment against the Christian culture, if you will, in America is that, in his words, that it will force itself on you. You'd made a comment earlier about fitting into a certain box. Well, that's kind of what LeCrae is saying here, that you have to talk like this, you have to dress like this, you have to assimilate, in his words, and then if you don't, people are going to side eye you. That's what he says. So he's talking about how he's not moved away from his relationship with Christ. In fact, he said, "There's no way you can say I'm not a follower of Christ, but I don't fit certain molds, and that's okay. And if you do, that's okay." So he says, when I say churchy, it doesn't mean I don't like fellowshipping with believers. But when I say churchy, it just means there's a certain cultures in churches that I don't really fall in line with. He says it's not his thing, and that's okay as long as you follow Christ. And he goes and talks about a lot with, he resonates with the book of John, especially the incident with Jesus and Peter, where, Peter denied Jesus 3 times, but then Jesus restores Peter. He says, "Peter, do you love me?" 3 times. Peter says, "Yes, Lord, I love you." And his response always is, "Then feed my sheep." So LeCrae, his justification of this, his album, his tell-all album, is his way of, quote, feeding the sheep, his way of following Christ in his way. So maybe I'm not tipping my hand here, but how do you feel, or what's your reaction to LeCrae's statements?
He's right and he's wrong.
Fair? Yeah.
He's right and he's wrong. That's my short version. First of all, I hear statements like that. I say churchy. When I say churchy, that doesn't mean I don't like fellowshipping with believers. But when I say churchy, it means there's certain cultures in churches that I just don't really fall in line with. And he said there's certain things that are done that's not my thing, and that's okay as long as you follow Christ. Well, what do you mean by that? To quote Greg Kokel, there are certain cultures in churches I don't agree with. You mean those cultures that believe Jesus died on the cross for our sins? Okay, that's a pretty big deal. It's not okay if you don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Look, any group, whether it's Christians, Muslims, vice presidents of student toenail clippings, whatever it is. My wife got rid of my sign. I'm just saying. So,
Why is State Puff on his side?
what's that?
Why is State Puff on his side?
He's just getting his toenail clipped.
He's chilling.
He's chilling. Yeah. And there was a new trailer came out this week for Ghostbusters Afterlife, by the way. So I couldn't not have Stay Puffed on the show. He's my bud. We have the same figure. So anyway, any group, whether it's, whatever label you attach, you have to have definitional boundaries for the label to have any meaning.
Right.
And speaking of Tim Foster's comment earlier about, what's happening in the Christianity today, and Tim, this is where I would say you kind of had a point there in this regard. I think there's a movement in especially in American Christianity today, to kind of remove those boundaries, to remove those defining lines. Well, if you remove those defining lines and anything goes, then what does it mean to say you're Christian anymore? It doesn't. And so it's just, what bothered me a little bit about what LeCrae said here is that he's not clear to me what he means by that. Depending on what you mean by, there's certain things that, if you don't agree with that, if that's not your thing, then that's okay. If it is your thing, then that's okay too. Well, yes and no. It depends what that is. That thing is that you're talking about. Now, where I agree with him, if this is what he means, and I don't know what he means, is there, and this gets back to the whole thing we were talking about earlier on the show, as far as the trappings of the gospel versus the gospel itself. The gospel message is what's important. The gospel message is what's timeless. The gospel message is what needs to define us, and that's cannot be compromised. As far as how that gospel message is expressed, how we worship, how we express our worship to God, whether it be with cymbals, whether it be with electric guitars, whether it be with an organ, all of those are the trappings, and there should be room within the Christian church for, to embrace various different ways of expressing that, of expressing our worship, of expressing gospel. And are there churches where if you don't, fit into that box and you don't do it all their way, they're going to look at you side-eyed?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fair.
And so if that's what he's saying, I think it's a fair criticism and it's a fair point he's making. But if he's instead expressing this almost anything goes mentality that we're seeing become very common in the church today, then that's not fair. Tim Foster asks, do you think John the Baptist would have been able to be John the Baptist operating out of his hometown synagogue?
He would have gotten some side eye. I'm sure he still got some side eye.
Like if you think about John the Baptist, was it you I was telling we should dress you up as John the Baptist and have you eat locusts?
Eat locusts, wear goat hair.
Yeah, we were just joking about that the other day. Ben's going to be doing that on Sunday.
No, just about that.
But you're right. I mean, because he certainly did not fit into the box of the local synagogue. And then I'll get to Pastor Jay's in a second because Tim Foster had a follow-up and said, I don't think LeCrae is a type of John the Baptist. And then Pastor Jay says, coming together allows us to create acceptable theological norms in which to lay in between. Not being together can lead to outside the bounds theological perspectives. That was the next point I was actually going to bring up here. And he said, and Pastor Jay, speaking to Tim's comment about John the Baptist, he did get some side eye. Oh, yeah, he did. And then he got his eyes and his nose and his mouth and everything else from the head neck up cut off.
Yeah.
So,
that's true.
Anyway.
That was side eye from the political
Yeah.
That was.
I just, when you were reading the story in his comments, the only thing that kept coming back to me was when Ryan was talking about the saying, you do you.
That's exactly the point that I was going to make, Mary Kay. Thanks for bringing that up. Because, it sounds a lot like when he's saying, where he says, I don't fit certain molds, and that's okay. If you do, that's okay. That's very much, that's in so many words, you do you. And I resonate with what Ryan said in his message. Was it 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago. He said, seek first the kingdom of God, and you do you are not compatible. If we are seeking first the kingdom of God, then we're not worried about doing us. We're worried about doing God and his work, doing God's work for the kingdom. And it does get into, and I think we have to be careful. I think there, just like you said, Ken, he's right and he's wrong. I agree that it's a fair point that there's a certain church culture that, and it does tie right into what we were talking about earlier with church trappings. I did and I'm not, this is not a condemnation by any means. It was just an interesting social experiment a while back when I did the one message where I dressed up as a homeless person outside of the church, seeing how many people would stop by. Even a comment on our Reddit thread when people were asking, what do you wish your church would do? That we asked on Reddit, what do you wish that your church would do that it's not? And somebody responded, connecting with homeless people, basically. I forget the exact wording.
When it says, I went to church, my church has a whole lot of money. I saw this homeless guy sitting outside, and I wish my church would do something about that.
And then the response follow-up to that, somebody else had commented was, well, did you do anything about that? Not accusingly asking that person, but just legitimately, what's the rest of the story? Because we all can do something, even if it's just talking to the person. And so in general, there's a culture in the church of, if you don't fit the image, then you're on the outside a little bit. And so I think we do have a lot of overcoming to do in that regard. But to the other side of that coin, I think we also have to hold a high view. Obviously, certainly our theology and soteriology, all of those, our view of God has to be higher still, and view of the Bible. But we still have to hold the church up as well as the means by which iron sharpens iron, and we can hold each other. There's a church accountability. There's so many goods that God instituted the church for.
And I do want to, and Tim Foster's got another comment here. Before we get to that, I wanted to go back to Pastor Jay's earlier comment where he talked about, not being together can lead to outside the bounds theological perspectives. And that's part of what coming together as a church is supposed to help guard us against. And that tied into something else that bothered me a little bit about what he said. LeCrae said, he said, when I say churchy, that doesn't mean I don't like fellowshipping with believers.
That's a Christianese word.
It's a Christianese word. And our need to gather together is for more than just fellowship. I mean, not to say the fellowship isn't important, it is, but a lot of what Pastor Jay's hitting on, there's theological correction and making sure we're staying on the straight path.
Worship.
Worship. Randy Gast was our
study.
Head of school. What's that?
Worship. You said worship, but study.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because
you delve in the word by yourself, and what if you're not quite getting it? You
come to a very wrong conclusion if you're an island. Yeah.
Or you think, well, this sounds like this is what God's saying. And because maybe you don't know the historical background or the context completely. There's just.
Our head of school, Randy Gass, and I were talking earlier today, and he was commenting about somebody, I won't name who, but somebody he knew from his past that he said that if they were in the church and, for example, Pastor Jay was preaching and he said something that Pastor Jay said something this person didn't agree with, that he would stand up and tell him what for right then and there. That's a little extreme correction, but actually, if you look back at the oral traditions, even the earliest church and the Jewish tradition, before they wrote wrote these things down, that's how it was done. We talked about this, I think, on last week's show, where you'd have the trade-in who'd come up there and share the story, and the group would be active as a group corrective if they ever said something because they told these stories over and over and over again. And if the spokesperson, the trade-in, said something that the group knew away, but you got the story wrong there, then the group would act as a group corrective, and they'd speak up and interrupt them, and they change the story and get it right.
And in doing so, we're able to preserve that.
Yeah, even without writing it down. It's amazing. And there are oral cultures today that still do this. It's a really amazing thing to study. But that's, we don't do it quite the same way today, but that is one of the functions the church is also supposed to do. And another important purpose to gathering together is to make sure our teaching does stay on the correct path. And so that's, that's another risk of what he's saying here. Is that doesn't mean I don't like fellowshipping with believers. Sure, we all like the pizza parties, LeCrae, but there's more to getting together with as a church than just that. There's the coffee social. Yeah, there's the service elements and everything like that. And what Tim said here, Tim Foster says, remember, Trinity handed over the pulpit to a homeless man. Mm-hmm. I don't. I mean, I don't think he's talking about you.
Richard. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I remember Richard now. Yeah, that is correct. That is true. So yeah, thanks for that memory, Tim. So yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear. Maybe I'm being overly pessimistic with this story. I mean, I hear there are certainly some problems with a lot of what he says. Some of what he says, I think the problem stems to, well, what exactly do you mean by that? And maybe I'm biased because I've seen so many stories of people, the
deconstructionism.
The deconstruction of Christianity, and a lot of what Tim Foster was talking about earlier today about what's going on in the American church today, and the theological direction it's going. And Pastor Jay talking about, well, if you don't gather, that you create these new norms. But what Ryan was talking about, I see so much of those things happening that I do admit that there's a bias probably when I read statements like this that I start to think, oh no, here we go again. So I'd welcome him giving more of an explanation. But admittedly, my gut reaction is, here's somebody else who's like, I'm a Christian, but I'm not religious, or and it's just like, no, there's reasons for all of this.
It's like I'm spiritual, but I'm not
spiritual,
religious.
But not religious.
It's a slippery slope down the path of error. And again, if we call ourselves a Christ follower, and again, like you, I don't want to be overly pessimistic here, but there are some causes for question in this article that, if he says there's no way you can't say I'm not a follower of Christ. Okay. Then how are you, in what context are you following Christ? I get the album, you're doing your thing, releasing this album as a way of feeding the sheep.
What are you feeding them with? Are you feeding them with what you want them to take?
With your content.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. I that raises questions for me. I don't want to be overly pessimistic.
Well, do we have any idea of some of the songs that are on this album?
Admittedly, I haven't listened to it, so I don't know. There might be.
What's the name?
Maybe he reads all of the Book of John on there. I don't know.
Well, you never know. Well,
I mean, I don't want to keep going because we're running late as it is here. It's already almost 10 after 7. But yeah, I guess there's just a cautionary note out there for.
Is it Restoration is the name of the?
Yeah, the name of the album is Restoration.
Don't start playing the music. We don't have the rights to it.
I'm not going to play it.
No, but I think that we need to realize that, we're commanded to come together. It's like, there's no way you can say I'm not a follower of Christ. Okay, then what do you do with the part where Christ says, we should be coming together, and if you only want to come together for fellowship, well, that's not what the teaching was,
And the whole gospel, the word of God is alive and active. It's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting. Well, you do all of those things in a corporate church setting.
Yeah.
You can't teach yourself. I mean, the Holy Spirit teaches us, but yeah.
Where 2 or more are gathered in my name. Well, there's a reason. You're supposed to be gathering. So anyway, all right. I think we've gone on long enough. That's our last story, right? I didn't forget one.
Yep.
All right. Great conversation. Thank you to everybody who participated. I always find it interesting that, tonight, like some nights it's like it's everybody's commenting on YouTube. Some nights it's kind of split between the two. Tonight, every single comment was on Facebook. We got a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion. None of it on YouTube, all of it on Facebook. That's kind of interesting. So anyway, it means absolutely nothing. It just, just things that make you go, all right. That's all I got. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Mary Kay. And thank you to everybody that was out there watching. Remember, we will be here every Wednesday, just about, except when we're not, at 5:30. What are you pointing at me for? Facebook is 10 seconds quicker.
That's why.
And Pastor Jay says, say goodnight, Gracie. Good night, Gracie. All right.
And Jake.
Jake and Gracie. You don't know what he's referencing? You go back, dig through the bowels of our YouTube channel. And Tim Foshers, have a blessed evening. You too, Tim. Thank you for the contribution to everybody. We will be back next week, next Wednesday at 5:30. And again, if you're not watching us live, please feel free to put your comments on the YouTube channel, on the YouTube video, and we will take them up at the beginning of next week's episode. Good night, everybody. See you next week. God bless. I did say thank you to you.